Welcome to Miami. F1 is back and we are here in Miami Beach for round 4 of this 2026 Formula One season. Welcome back to the Race Strategy Society. Yes, we are here in Miami for the long-awaited return of Formula One after a 5-week hiatus. Now, we are white racing in Miami, but the F1 paddock this weekend is actually sat inside an NFL stadium. It's not a metaphor. The Hard Rock Stadium, home of my beloved Miami Dolphins, is the literal setting for our paddock, our garages and our hospitalities. The track loops around it, weaves across the parking lot and dips back behind the main grandstand. The Dolphins Bowl is the visual constant from Sector 1 all the way to the checkered flag. And fun fact, while we're here, the Hard Rock Stadium's canopy is laid out so that the home team's bench sits in full shade and the visiting team's bench sits in full blazing sunshine. And on a hot Floridian Sunday, there's about 30 degrees Fahrenheit, so about 17 degrees Celsius between different sides of it. However it happened, sources will tell you it's either a happy coincidence or something to give the Dolphins a little bit of an edge, and frankly, they do need it a little bit sometimes. It is there in Formula One. Now, the paddock order, while we're on it, has nothing to do with the drivers or the constructors standing here. We don't go in our normal order, and I've always assumed that the order has to do with who they wanted to be basically their home team for the race weekend. I have my suspicions. Right. Enough of that. Welcome to Miami. Let's get on with the strategy. So, we've had a 5-week break, but what that gap actually was, it's been 5 weeks since Suzuka, with Bahrain and Saudi Arabia both off the calendar in April. The field's gone straight from Japan to Florida. It sounds like a long break, but it actually really isn't. A modern F1 team comprises of around 1,000 people. About 800 of those people actually work at the factory, aerodynamics, simulation, manufacturing, logistics, commercial, CFD farms that genuinely never sleep. 2 cancelled races didn't even touch their plans. Their roadmap is measured in like months and weekends, and they'll just keep building. So what about the other 200 in the race team, people like myself when I was a strategist? Well, 5 weeks with no race weekends when you'd normally expect 2 or 3. What do you do with it? Well, the same thing every single race team does. When they have spare hands on their time, rebuild the simulator runs, recorrelate the wind tunnel, models against actual track data, practice pit stops until the gunman's absolutely sick of them, and then going through pretty much everything that didn't go 100% perfect in Melbourne, Shanghai and Suzuka, and figure out which ones of those things you can fix before Friday. Now, bearing in mind each F1 car emits about 1.1 million data points per second, so it's roughly equivalent of a Formula One car streaming 1,600 Netflix movies simultaneously. 3 race weekends is an awful lot of data. And now, you can see why break is a word that we use very, very loosely. Now, the regulations have changed. For the first time this season, the FIA's adjusted those. 3 kind of big things have changed. There's some more tiny tweaks to do with the starts, but let's focus on these 3 big things for one. First off, the amount of energy you can maximize in terms of you're allowed to harvest per lap has gone from 8 to 7 megajoules, a smaller scoop every lap. 2, the rate at which you can recharge has gone up. Specifically, the bit known as super clipping, which I'll explain in a moment, gets a bit bigger maximum, so 350 instead of 250. Now, Friday's practice session was going to be an hour, it's now 90 minutes. For sure, teams will want to have longer, but basically to actually test all of these changes. But we said super clipping. Let's do super clipping in plain English. I have been asked this a lot, okay, because it's worth getting it kind of right and going into it. So you know how in a normal car, foot flat to the floor means that the car is accelerating. Now, with these 2026 cars under these regs, sometimes foot flat to the floor means the car stops accelerating or even slows down a touch. That's because the engine isn't sending all of that power to the wheels. Some of it's getting diverted into charging the battery. The MGUK that's bolted to the engine becomes a generator, basically. Rather than giving power, it's taking it away. And so the driver feels as though the car is kind of like slowing down, even though it's on full throttle. We call that super clipping. The car is recharging whilst the driver is asking to go. Now, why does it have to do that? because the battery's only got so much capacity, and on the next straight, that driver's going to want the electrical boost. So to be able to store the energy, you need to recharge faster than the deployment empties it. Most of your recovery comes from braking, but on a circuit, Miami's a good example, with long full throttle sections and not enough natural braking energy to keep the battery topped up. The car has to recharge while flat out. Now that is super clipping. What the new regs do is two things at once. They lower how much you need to recover per lap, so 8 megajoules down to 7 megajoules, basically smaller water chip at, and they raise how aggressively you can recover when you do. 250 up to 350, bigger chip. The result is super clipping happens in shorter, sharper bursts, maybe only around 2 to 4 seconds a lap, we'll have to see, where it used to be a lot longer if we hadn't tweaked those rigs. So less treacle, more racing, faster, where it matters on the racetrack. The point is less management and more driving. Now, what does it mean at Miami specifically? Without these tweaks, the racing would have been kind of bracing for a big amount of clipping at Miami. Regular clipping, not super clipping. Different thing. Regular clipping is when the battery just runs dry of electrical boost on the straight before it ends, and the car's kind of really visibly losing a lot of power. It's kind of like lunging. Now, why braced? Because Miami's geometry is you've got this short run into turn 1 and then 2 long ones into turn 11 and then a longer run into turn 17. Long straights is where the clipping is going to bite you, right? And the original 2026 regs would have kind of, left you effectively reaching for too much energy too late. Now with this tweaks, the picture is going to soften quite significantly. Less recovery is going to be needed per lap, faster recovery when you do it. Basically, we'll still probably see clipping into turn 11 and to long run into turn 17. Probably none into turn 1. The straight is too short for the battery to run dry, but the corners you don't notice clipping at can still be the ones that a strategist or a driver deliberately trades off, and that's where it gets interesting. And again, I've been asked this question quite a bit, so we're deep diving it now. Feel free to skip if this is not your thing, but we're going to talk energy optimization, because energy deployment is an optimization problem. And now on a track like Shanghai, when we went there, there's one big straight, one of the longest straights of the season. The maths is almost something you could do in your head, right? Basically, you want it all there. So saving the corners before it, spend on that one. Now, on a track like Australia, in Albert Park, there's 4 short straights. And then there's a bunch of different corners that also bring lap lines. And the maths gets really ugly pretty fast. Which corners do you give up in time? How much do you gain on each of those corners, and where? Now, that's kind of a multi-variable problem, we call it, around the whole lap, with the model trying to capture a multi-million degree of freedom system, aka car. Lots of different bits moving in lots of different ways. Now, the car itself won't even sit still for a photo, so it's a big old optimization issue. Now, on a track like Miami, it sits somewhere in the middle of easy to optimize, like Shanghai, and really, really hard, like Melbourne. That's because you've got 3 long straights. Okay, so you've got 3 straights, but then you've also got a high-speed sequence, the S's. That's turn 4 to turn 8. And that was actually designed with a nod to Suzuka. Fun fact. And then you've got a fiddly slow section, which is actually they had to put there because there's a motorway, highway right in the back. So that's why it looks awkward, because it is. Because even Formula One can't move all the roads. Right, so all of that is deployment relevant, right? Because it depends what order, what happens as to whether you can charge or not. And basically, it's perfectly possible that the fastest lap when we get here actually involves deliberately giving up a fraction into turn 1, carrying less battery there, and spending more across the S's or down the run to turn 17. Same total energy redistribution. However, sometimes a smarter call is the same speed but less risky, because the penalty if you get the deployment wrong can be different. When the car arrives at a track, the thing is, simulation is never, ever perfect. We get there, grip's a bit different, the wind's a bit different, the driver doesn't do exactly what's the optimum on the simulation. Maybe they go faster, maybe they go slower, maybe they lift a fraction left. Now, the optimization is genuinely off. Sometimes that can be just nothing, a couple of hundreds. Sometimes you end up like what happened to Charles Leclerc in sprint qualifying in China, where he used too much and then he ran out really, really fast and very dramatically with a clipping at the worst part of the straight to get a clip in because he'd spent it all earlier, accidentally, and then loses 0.3 of a lap, right? So it's pretty complicated, but here's the analogy I've used to basically describe what the problem is and why it's so hard. Okay, so imagine it's December. Bear with me here, right? You're living paycheck to paycheck. Presents, parties, families, Christmas, food, the whole shebang, right? You got to budget for it, right? It's the first of the month, but you don't know how much you're going to earn, and you don't really know how much everything is going to cost. You have a bit of a plan, and you kind of spend every December trying to work this one out, because how much you spend each week is really important, so you do not run out by December 25th, right? Run out and Christmas is ruined. But equally, you know, if you end up with the month and you get paid at the end and you've got loads left over, you could have made Christmas a little bit more special by buying that bigger turkey. Okay, the metaphor isn't perfect, but you understand what I mean. And in this example, the other thing is that you can't carry the money over to January, right? So it's a single lap, single shot. And that's pretty much the energy deployment problem under these new regulations. Less battery management means less lifting through corners like the S's. Less lifting means more committed lines. And the planning problem is still real, the inputs are still messy, and Miami is a mix of long straights, a couple of fast sweepers and slow chicanes, makes it one of the more interesting tracks that we're going to have to optimize. And the engineers are probably right now, if they're not already having dinner, having that argument in terms of optimization. Now, one last thing on inputs with Miami. Track grip on year changes here. The heat cycles roughly moving up. Yeah, the resurfacing smooths it. Florida Air does what it does to the tyre warm-up. Some teams actually send people to scan the tyres. I'm being told that it's nearly sunset, so I've got to get soon. But we won't know whose model is the best until Sunday. Now, let's get onto the track itself. The track, Miami, 5.412 kilometers, 19 corners, 57 laps, and 3 long straights, as we said, 1 awkward fiddly chicane through turns 14, 15, 16 that nobody really enjoys driving, and most drivers have at one point blamed for something. And then despite the kind of fast-looking first sector, Miami is actually one of the lowest kind of average speed circuits that we go to. The first sequence really does a good job of disguising it, because it's strategically interesting parts of it are the heavy braking zones, so into 1, 11 and 17. The S's are kind of like your tyre and aero county. Those corners have historically been Miami races kind of turning points. Turn 3 is where Sargent 2024 hit the wall, brought out the safety car that meant that Lando got his first ever win. Chicane at 14 to 16, that other fiddly bit. Sainz and Ocon had an impact in 22. Norris and Gasly also 2022. Verstappen took out a bollard there in 2024, which actually cost him enough race time that he couldn't re-overtake Lando when there was that safety car. And then, of course, the standard lap 1 chaos that we normally get at these kind of street tracks. Because a safety car at the wrong time for a driver is basically nearly always right for the other one. Miami is our second sprint of the season. The format, as you know, 1 practice session, sprint qualifying on Friday. Then Saturday we have the sprint, and then the qualifying for the Grand Prix, and then the Grand Prix on the main day. Now, we have 90 minutes for free practice, but it means that teams have got a lot of data by the time they get to go racing. Now, on paper, Miami looks strategically really easy. It's basically just a one-stopper. Tyre degradation has always been the limit, and the layout doesn't really punish a stint length. In 2023, it got resurfaced, and the deg basically got even further lower. For almost everybody, just stop once and then get on with it. However, 4 out of 4 of the Miami Grand Prix have not been won from pole. So no one's ever won this thing from pole position. So it does end up looking a little bit different to your standard one-stop. Pirelli are bringing the C3, the C4 and the C5. So expect to see the race likely to be medium hard. That's your default. But medium is kind of your start of race default. The hard has always been a proper rock here. Medium, a little bit more mixed in terms of behavior. And the real strategy here is not what is the strategy, it is when do you stop and what order do you run those tyres, medium/hard. 4 Miami Sundays we've had so far, 3 were decided by stop timing, 1 was decided by pure outpace, which was last year's race. None of them were decided by stop count. 2022, safety car for Lando, Norris and Gasly bunched up the field at lap 40 and changed everyone's maths. 23, Max Verstappen did a strategic masterclass running on the hard tyres at the start to overcut his teammate, winning from P9. 2024, Lando overcut his way to the lead when a safety car appeared. He got a cheap stop to be able to jump everybody else. And then in 2025, Piastri simply had the pace to overtake everybody and win, and really kind of ruined the run of it being a really properly strategic race. The pattern is plain. So at Miami, the strategist's job is to figure out what lap to stop the tyres. Seems simple, right? And some years that's the whole story. Some years a quicker car eats the field away and you're racing a timing problem that way. So 2023 is our best example of when it's better to choose the bolder hand. So let's set the scene. In a Red Bull is on pole. Max in a Red Bull is in P9. He didn't get to set a lap in qualifying because Charles put out a red flag. Now, basic call would have been to do medium hard, like the rest of the top 10. Slam dunk podium, and Max would probably have just got P2, job done, smile for the camera. Now it is Red Bull and Max Verstappen. They went the other way. Hards at the start. 8 of the top 10 started on the medium. Only Max and Esteban Ocon were the only ones starting on the hards. Now, the hard at Miami isn't a tyre that needs managing. It is a rock that you are racing all the way to the flag, right? So he used the car's pace and the fact that the hard needed much less management than the medium to be able to use the pace to pick off the field. P8 by lap 3, P6 by lap 4, P5 by lap 8, P4 by lap 9, Sainz on lap 14, Alonso on lap 15, and by the end of lap 20, he was in his teammate's gearbox, and when Checo pitted, he inherited the lead. Kept going while the field cycled through their stops on mediums after having to manage those tyres in traffic. Max stretched his hard stint deep, pits on lap 45, and literally comes out 1.7 seconds ahead of Perez, then uses fresh medium delta to basically clear it, right? Super, super easy. What I love about this strategy, though, is the fact that whilst the execution looked clinical, it was the statement it said. Starting on hards changed the expected outcome. If the tyres did what they were supposed to do, hard being a rock, medium being like a Floridian key lime pie melting in Miami pavement, the car being a missile, Max would win without team orders, without politics, without a podium. Basically be getting handed to him if they had to swap the cars or overtake on track or risk all of that stuff. Red Bull took a risk because the upside was a win. If they started on the medium, it pretty much would have been guaranteed P2. But if all of that had gone wrong, if that assumption had been wrong, Max would have basically thrown away that podium. And what's great about this is because that car was so dominant, but it was the first time we saw that season Red Bull took a risk because the upside was a win and the downside was a podium they didn't need. And a message to the rest of the grid was this: this is our toy set. Our drivers play to win. And the rest of you don't scare us. Brave, well executed, and no surprise, in retrospect, that it was the first race of Max's 10 consecutive wins, the longest winning streak in F1 history, by the way. It was also the final chapter of that Red Bull teammate fight. From that Sunday onwards, the teammate battle was over, inevitable, and if your car is the fastest car, the only fight that truly matters is the one against the other guy in your colour. Miami 2023 settled it. 2024, timing being its own strategy, completely different version. Now Max is on pole, Lando Norris is on the second row. McLaren is the kind of form that maybe could win on pace, but seriously, Max's car is probably faster. Now Max wasn't 100% perfect that day. Basically, he clipped a bollard, so his car was a little bit slower. But then he pitted in normal racing conditions. Lando stayed out, used a safety car, took a cheaper stop to be able to basically overcut him. Timing mattered. A green flag stop at Miami is about 20 seconds, safety car 12, 13, right? The lesson that he'd already done the strategic work mattered. Now, who should reach for which playbook going into 2026? I think the really interesting one is the Mercedes drivers. Why? Because Antonelli, leading the Drivers' Championship, 72 points, youngest person to ever lead the championship, by the way. His teammate, George, 63 points. Now, if they have exactly the same kind of margin they've had in the first 3 races, it's going to be Mercedes versus Mercedes, no matter what happens. So for me, the most interesting strategic call on Sunday, but let me know what you think, is not going to be for the person that starts at the front. It's going to be for the Mercedes car that qualifies second to their teammate at a circuit where ultimately, second place, you have two choices. Play it safe and then maybe fiddle around with timing around that pit stop, try and do the opposite, cover a different safety car window. Or if the tyres allow it, if the medium's looking a little bit fragile this year compared to the hard, do you go 2020 style? Play the risky strategy, play to win. You know, for me, I think they should go for it. You can't outpoint someone whose worst day is a podium and whose normal day is a win. And you can either match them or you make a bolder call. And that is where the maths is going to get interesting before we wrap it up. The worse the medium looks on Saturday, the better the hard start gets. Bigger gap in stop lap, more laps before you have to pit. Bigger gap in pace, the hard's relative advantage as the medium falls off. And a fragile medium is actually better when you bolt it on at the end because lower fuel, easier to push on it. Risk is, of course, exposure. By committing to hards at the start, you are exposing your window. If there's an early safety car, you're going to have to, basically get stuffed. But also, if you've got a very fast car, you can offset that. So you have to bet. Back yourself, back your strategist, back the hard tyre, and accept that the Miami can hand you the room you need it or close it on you. The sprint on Saturday is going to tell us a lot. I can't wait to see how the tyres behave. Now, F1 is truly back, and it's not just a simple one stop after all. Make sure to come back after the race for all the analysis, and let's see if somebody can finally win this Grand Prix from pole position.